Hey, welcome to the Conspiracy Jungle, or rather, welcome to the Mr. Brit Show on Resistance Radio. It's good to be back. It's been a couple of weeks. I hope you're all doing well. I've been over in England for the last week, so that's why I missed last Friday's show. But I hope you can hear me loud and clear now. And welcome to the show. Nice to see you all. Not been able to catch many of the shows this week. The schedule has been a bit patchy, actually, and I'll just explain what's been going on. Sort of unforeseen circumstances, basically. Lee and Travis cancelled at the last minute on Sunday. Lee's ill, and Travis had family issues to sort out. And also, we haven't had any shows from Zach for a couple of weeks, and that's because his broadband has been off, apparently, or rather his broadband's been intermittent, and apparently it's been going off in the evening, so he's not been able to do his show, which is a bit of a shame because he had Annie Machon lined up, so hopefully he can reschedule that show. If you can just drop a message in the chat room that you can actually hear me, guys, that would be much appreciated. You know what my equipment's like, not too good, and it's always good to know that I am actually talking to people. I'm not just talking to myself. So, how's it going? What's been going on? More to the question. Well, I haven't been watching too much news this week. Been a bit busy, but, you know, as usual, loads of stuff happening. I mean, I wasn't going to talk about 9/11 very much, because I think we're all pretty much burnt out on 9/11. But it just keeps coming back, doesn't it? So I'm going to be getting into Ahmadinejad's comments about 9/11 at the UN General Assembly yesterday. I'll get into that a bit later on in the show, because of course the Palestinians are trying to secure statehood at the UN General Assembly, and that's going to go to the vote tomorrow. So I've got some news stories about that to get into, and I've also got some news stories about Google. I had the sudden realization this week that basically Google knows literally everything that I do on the internet now. So I'll get into that a bit later. It suddenly hit me like how many Google products I actually use, and it's quite scary, really. So I've got some stories about Google's violations of privacy and stuff like that. So anyway, yeah. Thanks for tuning in tonight. As I say, hopefully the shows will be back to normal as soon as possible. You know, it's understandable when hosts have to cancel a show at the last minute. You know, I don't pay anyone to do these shows. I can't pay anyone to do these shows because I don't earn any money from this. I had some donations which, you know, covered a good sort of percentage of the BTR hosting fees, which was $300 last year, and which will be $400, but that's not going to be due until like next March. I have got website fees to pay as well, which is going to be like 150 quid. So if you do want to donate, you know, if you listen to Resistance Radio and you enjoy what we do, it would be much appreciated if you could chip in, and you know, your money goes towards these fees that I pay. I'm not making a profit from what I do. If I did make a profit from Resistance Radio, then I would hope to, you know, share that out with the other hosts. But I mean, there's really no money in this game, unless you're Alex Jones, of course, and then you earn loads of money. But at this level, you know, nobody's making any money from doing this. You know, the other hosts on board here, they've got donate buttons up on their blogs as well. Adonis, Travis, Keelan. So if you don't donate to me, if you've got a particular favourite on Resistance Radio, you can go and throw them a few virtual coins, and you know, they would much appreciate it. I just can't understand these people who, you know, try and have a dig at people for asking for donations. I mean, if you think about the amount of time that people put in doing this, like week after week, and you know, they don't get paid for it. You know, they're not earning money from from a news organization. So if you do listen to Resistance Radio, it would be appreciated if you could help out. If you don't donate, then you can buy a DVD. Keelan sells DVDs. So do I. I mean, I will have to ask for donations if I decide to stay on Blog Talk Radio. Maybe I can look into some other options, but I will have to have donations to do that because I don't want to fund it all myself, basically. I know it's pretty hard, I wouldn't ask anybody who couldn't afford to donate, just if you can afford to, Anyway, well, yeah, I mean, like I said, economic times are hard for all of us, and especially so in the last few days, It seems like we're quite close now to some kind of, big event happening. I don't know whether you've been keeping an eye on the stock markets and the prices of, silver, but yesterday there was a massive crash in the stock markets and in silver. I do have a little bit of silver, and basically it's about $10 an ounce has been wiped off in the last few days, all in reaction to this information that the US is going to pump, more money into the economy. $400 billion plan to save ailing US economy, and the Bank of England likely to follow suit with new round of quantitative easing. So the US and UK going to be pumping more worthless pieces of paper, or more likely worthless computer digits, into the economy. It's just a joke, really. I do follow this financial stuff, and I try and understand it, try and get my head around it, but all I can think at the end of reading an article about the economy is, well, it's just a load of bollocks, isn't it? I mean, that's what it comes down to, basically. It's just a load of bollocks. It's a load of fictional units, which, people create out of nothing. You all know the score, don't you? You all know the score, but there is moments when you start thinking about this kind of stuff and you just think, like, this is just so insane. And it doesn't seem that anyone in the mainstream ever says this. If you do come out and start questioning the bigger picture, which is the entire financial system, the entire financial system, which is based on nothing, it's not backed by anything, based on debt. If you do question that bigger picture, then you're deemed a conspiracy theorist or some kind of nut job. And isn't that insane? That you can't question this absurd construction, which is the economy, basically. So anyway, everything's going downhill, isn't it? I mean, we've been saying this for so long now. I think a lot of us, I know I am, we're just kind of waiting for something to happen. I mean, I have put out videos in the past, like saying, let's just bring on this collapse. I mean, that is rather flippant of me to say that, because obviously in a financial collapse, loads of people are going to suffer. But there is a part of me that does want to see a collapse come, really, because, it might be an opportunity to kind of start again and to get back to what's important in life, which is community, which is families, friendship, self-sufficiency. It could go two ways, really, couldn't it? And I've spoken to lots of people who have different opinions. Some people think it's going to be basically sort of all-out warfare and every man and woman for themselves, looting, murder. If you've got any kind of food or water, then you're going to be robbed and all this kind of stuff. But then there are other people who take a more optimistic angle to it, which is that it could be an opportunity for us to, get back together again and start working with each other and build things up from there. And how's it going to go? Well, I really don't know. Who can say? I mean, I think it's going to be worse in the US than it is in Europe and in Britain. The US is just a more violent country, isn't it? And that's where ultra-capitalism, or what is called capitalism, ultra-crony capitalism, corporatism, has really been, taken to the extreme, far more in the US than in Europe and Britain, I think. And I think in the US, there could well be violence, and it could be a very dangerous place to be when this thing finally collapses. But in Europe, in Britain, I don't know. I mean, I like to think we're a bit more sort of, well, I was going to say civilized, but that sounds really insulting to the people from the US. But I don't know. I like to think we could be able to deal with it in a better way. So who can say? So yeah, anyway, if you have got some silver, then you want to check out the prices, because that's just collapsed in the last couple of days. Like, it's gone down to $30 an ounce now, and it was over $40 a few days ago, and it nearly reached $50 a couple of months back, or a few months back. Actually, it was back in May. It was when Osama bin Laden was killed. That's when silver nearly reached $50. So that's nearly $20 off an ounce of silver. So it's quite extraordinary, really, to see it. But it doesn't worry me. I don't have a great deal of silver, just a little bit of savings in silver. But if I do get any more spare money, then I will probably buy a bit more, because it's on sale basically. I can't see it going much lower than this. I really don't think that's possible. Anyway, yeah, so as usual, bad economic news. I come on here every week and I kind of talk about the same things. It's a bit difficult sometimes to know what to talk about, because it's just the same things happen again and again, or it's a gradual deterioration, which is basically what's happening with the global economy. I mean, we are heading into another Great Depression, and people can't get their heads around that. I don't think a lot of people are still living in some kind of fantasy world, and a lot of that is to do with the mainstream media. The mainstream media talk about the euro being in danger and stuff like this, but you don't see anybody actually giving any helpful advice to what could happen and what people could do in a situation where the euro or the pound or the dollar collapsed. Not in the mainstream news. I mean, if these companies were responsible, surely they would be helping to prepare people for the worst case situation, which would be the pieces of paper, the numbers that people have in their bank accounts are worthless. It's really important. They should be helping people to prepare for that in a worst case scenario, but no, they're not doing that, because they don't want to instill panic in people, Anyway, back to what I was talking about at the beginning of the show. And, actually, I'll talk a little bit about my trip to England, because it's been quite a few months since I went back to England, and it's always interesting to go back. I mean, I will be moving back in a couple of months permanently. So I've been over in West Yorkshire, and it's quite interesting, because, I mean, if you go to certain places, you can really feel this economic downturn, depression, recession, whatever words you want to call it. But then you go to other places and everything seems fine. So I spent some time in Bradford and I spent some time in Leeds, and it's very interesting to compare the city centres of both Bradford and Leeds. If you go to Bradford, it really does feel like a city in trouble, and things are really grinding down there. I mean, you look around the city centre, and it really does feel quite bleak. There's so many shops that are shut. It just looks really run down. Lots of beggars, stuff like that. But then you go to Leeds city centre, and it looks pretty well to do. All of the shops seem to be doing well. I even took a stroll through Harvey Nichols just out of curiosity. I didn't buy anything in there, but I do like to see how the other half lives. So it's just really interesting to compare this, the wealth of places like Harvey Nichols in Leeds and the people shopping in there, with the very poor people in Bradford and the rundown shops or the empty shops and the pound shops and things like that. It's very interesting to see these two totally different sides of life. And these rich people, I'm sure a lot of them aren't affected by, or they aren't affected very much by this economic downturn. We really are heading into a society where we have the very poor, and the poor, and then we have the very rich. The middle class is being, well, eviscerated, basically, isn't it? We've heard from people who even, I believe, have decent jobs, like our host Blue Bus. I think he has a reasonably decent job, and even he says it's becoming difficult to make ends meet. So yeah, it was good to be back in England. Anyway, I'm looking forward to going back. I don't have a job there yet, and it is very expensive, especially for booze, compared to where I am here. But yeah, I do miss England. I've been over here for like 5 years now. I live in the Netherlands, but I spend a lot of time in Germany where I work. And I'll tell you one of the things that I miss about England, which sounds really odd, but that's queues and the British queuing mentality. The British kind of get the piss taken out of them for being a nation of queuers. But I think this is a really positive characteristic of the British, because in Germany, people just don't queue, and if you wait in a shop or whatever, you'll often get people just push in front of you. If you wait for a bus, people just try and barge on the bus. They don't respect people who've been there longer than them or whatever. Whereas in Britain, the British form an orderly queue. I think it's really civilized. I really like it. And it's totally different if you go to a bar as well in Germany. If you go to a bar in Britain, there's a kind of an awareness amongst people waiting at the bar who was there first, and the barkeeper is aware of who was there first. It's all very civilized, and people don't push in, and that's frowned upon. But they just don't care in Germany. They don't have this system whatsoever, and I think that's a really positive thing about Britain. I'm sure when I get back to Britain, all of the things that really used to annoy me will start grating on me again. The reasons why I moved away in the first place. But anyway, looking forward to coming back. Just have to find a job, basically. That's the worrying thing. Anyway, yeah, I was going to move on to some other stories. So like I was saying, it's this UN General Assembly going on at the moment, and the Palestinians are trying to get statehood, which it blatantly looks like they're not going to get. The Americans or the US have basically said that there shouldn't be any more UN resolutions on this, and it should be down to the Israelis and the Palestinians to sort it out amongst themselves. Of course, the Americans are totally under the control of Israel, of the Israeli lobby in the US, and also Britain appears to be the US's bitch at the moment. So Britain is the US's bitch, and the US is Israel's bitch. That's the state of affairs. And, with that set up, there's not going to be statehood for Palestine. And there's a really good article in The Independent by Robert Fisk today, entitled, A President Who is Helpless in the Face of Middle East Reality. Obama's UN speech insists Israelis and Palestinians are equal parties to conflict. And it just goes on about just how absurd his speech was to the UN. He refers to Obama's performance as pathetic. And it quotes a Palestinian journalist called Hanan Ashwari, who said, "I couldn't believe what I heard," she told Haaretz, that finest of Israeli newspapers. "It sounded as though the Palestinians were the ones occupying Israel. There wasn't one word of empathy for the Palestinians. He spoke only of the Israelis' troubles." And then Robert Fisk says, "Too true." And as usual, the sanest Israeli journalists, in their outspoken condemnation of Obama, proved that the princes of American journalists were cowards. The limp, unimaginative speech that US President Barack Obama delivered at the United Nations reflects how helpless the American president is in the face of Middle East realities. Yeah, so this speech, didn't put any of the blame on Israel for what's happening. Made the Palestinians to be the bad guys in all of this. There were two equal parties to the conflict, even though, of course, as we all know, the Israelis are occupying Palestine, building illegal settlements. They have the Palestinians basically housed in open-air prisons, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. The massive amount of death that the Israelis have inflicted on the Palestinian people. All the time, the Palestinians get the blame for what happens there. For firing kind of crude rockets at Israeli houses, and it's just crazy, And some of the coverage by the press was lame as well. Just repeating what Obama says without even questioning it, even though he came out with things that were completely wrong. I mean, I've got the Guardian newspaper here. There was a quote from Obama in which he refers to the Holocaust as usual. The Holocaust card, even though the Palestinians had absolutely nothing to do with the Holocaust. Why should they pay the price for something that was inflicted on Jewish people by Europeans? So, he referred to the Holocaust as usual, because that always happens. And he came out with the hoary old quote about Ahmadinejad declaring that he wanted to wipe Israel off the map, because that always gets wheeled out, doesn't it? Whenever Western leaders want to defend Israel and to defend what Israel is doing in the Middle East. This apparent quote from Ahmadinejad where he threatened to wipe Israel off the map, which obviously implied an act of aggression, an act of military aggression to try and remove or to try and erase Israel. How would that even be possible? It's ridiculous. You can't just erase an entire country in the Middle East from the map. But anyway, I'm sure you all know this, but that quote has been debunked quite widely. In fact, so widely that there's even a section on Wikipedia about it. So for Obama to use this quote is just kind of outrageous, really. He surely knows that this is a mistranslation of what was actually said by Ahmadinejad. I'll just find this section in the Wikipedia page, which is the page about Ahmadinejad and Israel. Let's just have a look, because it was the original quote was translated by somebody who speaks Arabic, and his interpretation was totally different to the one that Obama said the other day, basically. No, I can't find it now. Where is it? No, it's somewhere in that Wikipedia page anyway. You can just look it up. I need to learn how to bookmark these things. Anyway, I'll probably find that in a bit. But yeah, it was a total mistranslation, and what he actually said was he wanted to see the Zionist regime wiped from the pages of time, which had a different meaning to this wiped off the map statement. That's a shame I can't find that, because it was I had some good quotes to read out. Anyway, I'll come back to that in a minute. And of course, he was also talking about 9/11 in his speech to the UN General Assembly yesterday. I watched the whole speech, which is about half an hour long, which you can find on YouTube. And, you know, you have to say it was a pretty good speech. I think we should try and get Ahmadinejad to do a slot on Resistance Radio. Because, I mean, most of what he was saying was pretty much exactly what, you know, we here at Resistance Radio say, which is, you know, quite a weird situation to be in, seeing as he is demonized as being, you know, an evil guy, a mad evil guy. You know, I always have to make the disclaimer that I don't support Ahmadinejad, just as I didn't support Colonel Gaddafi. I always have to put that disclaimer in there. I mean, you know, he is the head of a government, and you know, he's not a great guy or anything like that. But you know, I do enjoy his speeches because they're just kind of so confrontational, and you have to respect that, really, because nobody else is saying these things in the world, are they? If a Western leader said the kinds of things that Ahmadinejad said, you know, they would just lose the job, basically. So he does kind of spit out quite a lot of truth. I mean, he obviously, you know, I'd rather live in Britain than in Iran, put it that way. I mean, it's not a good regime, is it, really? I mean, if you want to be a political dissident, then, you know, the punishments in Iran are going to be far worse than they are in Britain. So let's not forget that. And let's not forget that, you know, Ahmadinejad very much uses things like 9/11 as part of his propaganda. Anyway, I'll move on to 9/11 because I found the section about the translation of the quote. So, yeah, quite a few people actually have translated it, and they've all, you know, come to the same conclusion, that it was totally mistranslated. So the first guy was a guy called Nurutsi, who said the statement "wiped off the map" was never made, and that Ahmadinejad did not refer to the nation or landmass of Israel, but to the regime occupying Jerusalem. With the result, he translated it with the result: the Imam said this regime occupying Jerusalem must vanish from the page of time. And a guy called Cole, a professor from the University of Michigan, in modern Middle East and South Asian history, also agreed that the translation should be: the Imam said that this regime occupying Jerusalem must vanish from the page of time. And several other people have said the same thing, you know, that this was basically denoting a spiritual wish, rather than the erroneous translation to wipe Israel off the map, which suggested a military threat. So for Obama to still be using that, I mean, it's just really bad, isn't it? Basically, there's nothing else to say about it other than, you know, it's totally inaccurate, and it just shows how it's used as propaganda by the West. Anyway, on to 9/11 again. Yeah, because Ahmadinejad did another similar speech, didn't he? I think it was last year, referring to 9/11. And I didn't actually realize Ahmadinejad was an engineer, but apparently he is actually a trained engineer, which obviously, you know, adds a bit more credence to people who speak out about 9/11 if they actually kind of trained in architecture and engineering and stuff like that. So yeah, he basically came out again and questioned 9/11. Also questioned, quite rightly, the supposed killing of Osama bin Laden. You know, quite rightly. I'm just looking at a news article from the Daily Mail here, which is kind of representative of some of the commentary about his speech to the UN. There's a picture of a protester outside the UN with an Ahmadinejad mask and a red nose to make him look like a clown. And then the headline of the article is, "What a clown! US delegation walks out of UN speech by Iranian President Ahmadinejad as he comes to New York and calls 9/11 a mystery." Yeah, so, you know, that's really mature, isn't it, to just call him a clown for asking questions about 9/11. I mean, in the speech, he didn't even say that the US had done it. He didn't blame the US government. I mean, I know he's done that in the past, but in this speech, he didn't. And he basically just said it was a mystery. And he questioned the official story, and that was enough to get people starting to walk out of the assembly hall And then, of course, when he started going on about, well, again, they played it as like he was denying the Holocaust. But I listened to the speech, and he didn't actually say that he didn't think the Holocaust didn't happen, which, again, I know he has done in the past. But in the speech, he was like questioning why Israel and the Zionist leaders are still getting reparations for the Holocaust. That's basically all he said in this speech. And of course, that was enough to get like loads more people walking out of this assembly hall. And it's just so childish, isn't it, when you see these diplomats and politicians and delegations just getting up and just walking out during the middle of his speech. It's just so childish. If you disagree with Ahmadinejad, then debate him. But you don't just get up and walk out. How old are these people? And they're paid to be there. And it's pretty shit to see them who've been paid for by the taxpayer just getting up and just leaving their job, which is to sit there and listen. So it's just crazy anyway. So yeah, questioning 9/11. I mean, this raises kinds of interesting questions about whether this is a good thing, because obviously this guy is seen as evil by a lot of people in the West, and he's seen as a madman. So what effect will this have on sort of 9/11 truth? Is it good for 9/11 truth? Is any publicity good for this kind of stuff? Or does it, tar all of us with the same brush, the brush of being a nut job or whatever? There's a box in this article with some more of his rants. And they've made it sound a bit nuts. They've used the wiped off the map phrase again, which I've just gone over, as being false. They said he has said terror leader Osama bin Laden was hiding in Washington D.C. because he was a previous partner of Mr. Bush. Well, I remember when that story came out, and he made that comment as a joke, quite a funny joke actually. He was being interviewed by an American journalist who was basically insinuating that Osama bin Laden was being harbored in Tehran, and Ahmadinejad had said, "Oh no, actually, we think he's in Washington D.C. because he was good friends with Mr. Bush," and it was just a blatant joke. And now, the Daily Mail have used it out of context to make him look, crazy or whatever. So yeah, just a hit piece basically on Ahmadinejad. Anyway, talking about 9/11, which, as I said earlier, I didn't want to do really, but it seems to keep coming up. I mean, we have just had the 10-year anniversary, so there's obviously going to still be a lot of stuff about it in the media. And I just wanted to refer you to an interesting article which came out this week, which is basically the fact that loads of psychologists have come out and talked about, alternative 9/11 theories. This was in washingtonsblog.com. Psychologists said questioning 9/11 is the sane thing to do, and there's a whole list of psychology professionals who've basically come out and spoken about disbelieving the official story and listening to alternative information about 9/11. So I've actually got a clip from a YouTube video which went up last week, in which some psychologists talk about exactly that, and it's pretty interesting. I'm just going to play a few minutes of that, and I'll also drop the link into the chat room because it's well worth checking out. Because when you show people psychologists talking about this kind of stuff, well, it's not quite so easy just to label them as being mad, is it? Because they work in the mental health field, so that's going to create some real cognitive dissonance for official conspiracy theory believers when you show them these psychologists talking about 9/11 alternative theories. I mean, no doubt they're going to try and slander these people as being, non-representative of the industry, or only being a tiny percentage of the psychological field. That's what they do with the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. Just try and paint them as a tiny percentage of the entire world's architects and engineers. I mean, which is true, they are, but that doesn't reflect the fact that it doesn't mean they're wrong, basically. And it doesn't reflect widespread knowledge about these issues. 90% of the world's architects and engineers might not have even looked into this information. So anyway, I'm going to play a few minutes of the video now, and as I say, I will drop the link into the chat room for you to check out later.
At this point, we have 9 years of hard scientific evidence that disproves the government theory about what happened on September 11th, and yet people continue to be either oblivious to the fact that this information exists or completely resistant to looking at this information. So the question becomes why? Why is it that people have so much trouble hearing this information? From my work, I think we would be remiss not to look at the impact of trauma. My name is Marty Hopper, and I'm a PhD clinical psychologist. I've been working and living for the past 30 years here in Boulder, Colorado. For the past 11 years, my work has focused on helping people who have experienced personal trauma. Now, as we know, the horrors of what happened on 9/11 were televised all over the world, and they were televised, in fact, live. We witnessed the deaths of almost 3,000 of our fellow Americans. We know this had a very severe and traumatic impact on a majority of the population. I myself cried for weeks after September 11th. A friend of mine who is a psychologist in practice here in Boulder said that her caseload increased tremendously after 9/11, and people that she hadn't seen in 10 years were coming back into her practice. So I think it's safe to say that collectively as a nation, because of what happened on September 11th, we experienced trauma.
I'm Fran Schur, and I have a master's degree from the University of Colorado. I've had a private practice as a psychotherapist and as a licensed professional counselor for about 20 years. Why do people resist this information, the information that shows that the official story about 9/11 cannot be true? What I've learned is that as humans, each of us have a worldview, and that worldview is usually formed in great part by the culture we grow up in. When we hear information that contradicts our worldview, social psychologists call the resulting insecurity cognitive dissonance. For example, with 9/11, we have one cognition, which is what the official story of 9/11, what our government told us, what our media repeated to us over and over, that 19 Muslims attacked us. On the other hand, we have what scientists, researchers, architects, engineers are now beginning to tell us, which is that there is evidence that shows that the official story cannot be true. So now we've lost our sense of security.
On a mission wants to get rid of us just because he misread the syllabus. Have no arsenal up on the minibus. We point out troops, he claims to be sick of us. Not quite smart enough to be anarchist. Life revolves around megaphones, cannabis, vanity, embarrassment, false analysis, fake philanthropy, blatant cowardice. Get hard work or credible research. He'll save the world with anarchy t-shirts. Get them two for a tenner in Primark. Thank God the kids in the sweatshops work so hard. Go from take a donation, right credit cards, calling Holly Gregor retards, elite status, man of conviction. Perhaps take a look at your own affliction. You shouldn't be biting ducks if you don't win debates by getting upset. You might get put but your word can't be unsaid. Remember, anonymous, never forget, and the net's no line to overstep. It doesn't all stop at the computers reset you. Use your platform to spread this nonsense and claim it all to be an act of conscience. Don't pretend you didn't expect a reaction. We might be a group now for blatant inaction, but you're proven wrong and brought no retraction. Then there's idiots who face distraction. No, it's a pretty fair grievance. Went on the beat for all the wrong reasons. Read new speak in the 20th century. Warmongering criminals, evidently. Truth is there, it's all elementary, and it won't be stopped by a cheap documentary. And you have to suffer from real naivety to think it brings us objectivity. No, they blatantly chose people whose thoughts are so uncomposed. If they would chose those who were composed, it would change the whole fucking point of the show. Imagine next day in the Daily Mail, the Beavers promoting fairy tales, and that in itself is pure blackmail. And one day we know that the truth will prevail. Then a thermite find a debris shower, presidential consolidation of power. Charlie Beach and his finest hour insists smoke mirrors and Lego towers. Lego fucking towers. Egg and fucking flour. Lego fucking towers.
All right, welcome back to the Mr. Brit Show. So that was a video of various psychology professionals talking about 9/11 alternative theories, and then I just dropped in there Silent Slumbers tune about Charlie Veitch. You might have seen my video today. Great track there by Silent Slumber. Of course, Charlie Veitch continues his all-out war on his self-labeled conspiracy theorists. Quite entertaining to watch. Yeah, who knows what the guy's up to? I mean, he's certainly rubbing people up the wrong way, isn't he? Maybe that's his intention, I don't know. But I thought that was a really good tune. Anyway, welcome back to the show, as I say. If you haven't checked out the Resistance Radio website, please do so. That's resistradio.com. And I shouldn't say this, but if you see any adverts on there that you think are interesting, maybe you could click on a couple of adverts. Yes, I have sold out, and I have put Google AdSense adverts on my website, on the Resistance Radio website. I mean, I do need to raise money, as I was saying earlier, because I've got these hosting fees coming up. And yeah, I just decided to sell out and put them on there just to see what would happen. And believe me, you don't make a great deal of money from them. I've made like about €1 in a week or something. So like small amounts of money, tiny amounts of money. But basically I get paid if people click on the advert. But like, don't overdo it, because they'll know what's going on. But if you just go on there and like maybe click 1 or 2 adverts, that'll be all right. So check out resistradio.com. I'll drop that. Well, maybe someone else can drop the link. Oh yeah, cheers Heretic, you've dropped it in there. Yeah, so check that out. Yeah, so anyway, this got me to thinking about Google and the fact that basically Google is taking over my entire life, because I recently installed this Google Chrome browser, which I have to say is really good. I mean, this is the thing about using Google stuff, I mean, they do come out with some good stuff, so you're kind of torn between not buying into this, massive multinational privacy invading corporation and just ease of use, basically. It's really seductive to get sucked into using their products. So I've got basically the Google Chrome browser. I've now got Google AdSense adverts on my website and on some YouTube videos. Of course, YouTube is owned by Google, so I make all my videos on YouTube. So they're all owned by Google. I added my Blogger account to my YouTube channel the other day and realized that Blogger is also owned by Google. I've got a couple of Gmail accounts. So Google is just like taking over, isn't it? It's taking over the entire world. And it's frightening, the amount of information that they have access to now. Basically they know everything that I do on the internet. They know when I make a video, what it's about. They know what I search for, because I use Google search. I probably should use another search engine, but I just use Google. So they know everything that I search for. They know everything that I write about on Blogger. That's just crazy, isn't it? I don't have an Android device, but this week a story came out about Google creating these mobile wallets for basically an application, a Google app, which is allowing people with smartphones to use them as a credit card. So basically you connect your smartphone to your credit card account, and when you go to buy something in the shop, you can swipe your smartphone, which acts as your credit card. So I mean, it's all just becoming interconnected, and it's just frightening, the amount of information they're going to have. They're going to have access to all of these people's shopping history, and then that's going to be used to, target advertising to the shoppers. I mean, so we're just entering, it's a brave new world, isn't it? Really. Google are going to be monitoring everything, and you're going to be walking down the street, and billboards will be advertising things specifically for you, and just crazy shit like that. And I don't want to live in a world like that, you know. I don't want Google to know everything about me. They've got no right to know this much about people. I mean, I don't have a smartphone, I don't have a credit card, but I'm sure it's going to get to a point where all transactions are carried out like this, you know. Debit cards are going to be changed into this format as well, where you have to swipe a smartphone. So these massive corporations are going to have access to all of our information. And it's scary. When you look at how Google is being caught out in terms of the privacy laws that they've broken and how they've invaded people's privacy, you know, it really is scary. There's various stories about what Google have done. I mean, a recent one was about this Google Buzz, which I don't actually use, but apparently this was a function that was connected to Gmail, and they automatically opted people in who had a Gmail account. And then what they were doing was showing who you had most emailed without your consent. And there are all kinds of privacy implications from this, you know. If you'd been emailing people who you didn't want other people to know you'd been emailing, the examples given were, you know, connections between former employers or former partners, or people who were maybe, people just people who were communicating with people that they didn't want other people to know about, you know, which is everyone's right to conduct secret, relationships like that. And apparently they'd blown loads of people's cover. So, you know, loads of people were mad because, their cover had been blown, and people they didn't want to know about their communications had found out about them, which had broken privacy laws. A leading privacy group has urged US regulators to investigate Google's new social networking service Buzz 1 week after its launch. This was back in February last year. The Electronic Privacy Information Center has made its complaint to the US Federal Trade Commission. It says that Buzz, which is part of Google's Gmail service, is deceptive and breaks consumer protection law. The search giant has twice made changes to the service to placate an outcry from users about privacy concerns. And there were other stories as well, of course. There was the story about the Street View vans that had been basically sucking up loads of data from Wi-Fi hotspots. You know, this Google Street View in itself is pretty dodgy, you know, because if you know someone's address, you can just go on there and then basically see where they live and get an image of the house. And I wouldn't be comfortable about that. I mean, actually, I don't know whether my house is on it. I haven't checked. Maybe I should do that. But you can basically get just very clear shots of where people live and the houses. But anyway, when they were going around taking the photos for the Google Street View, the vans had been tapping into unsecured connections that people had and sucking up data, including loads of email addresses and passwords and whole complete emails. This was from July of last year. Google pressed on Wi-Fi snooping. Google is being pressed to name the engineers who wrote code that captured personal data from unsecured Wi-Fi networks. Google Street View cars collected this data while taking photographs and gathering location data to create the search giant's imaging service. The call to name the coders came from the coalition of 38 US states investigating the privacy breach. And of course, Google said it was a mistake. They apologized quite a lot for it, but that doesn't really mean anything, does it? They got the data, and who knows what else they're doing. While Street View cars were supposed to log the location of Wi-Fi hotspots, as they gathered photographs and images of the road, they also collected data passing between unsecured hotspots and personal computers. So as I said, they got loads of emails, passwords, email addresses, just a total invasion of privacy. So, it's bad enough having the elected government being Big Brother, but, it's private corporations who are also Big Brother. And I've repeatedly referred to a report that I read, which is called Neocon Opticon. And that talks about exactly what's coming in Europe in terms of private security agencies and companies having access to your information, and the really truly terrifying systems that are going to be put into place in Europe over the coming years. If you haven't checked out the report yet, then I urge you to do so. It's not too long. It doesn't take too long to read. It's called Neocon Opticon. It's a really good one, so check it out. Anyway, guys, I'm coming to the end of the show now. I would like to thank you for tuning in. As always, it's much appreciated. As I said earlier, check out the website. It'll be nice to see a bit more traffic on there, a bit more interaction on the forum. There haven't been many people active on there recently, apart from fucking spammers. Every day I get a enticing opportunity to buy some Viagra or to access some hentai porn, both of which I assure you I'm not interested in. So anyway, yeah, check out the website, resistradio.com. Check out my YouTube channel, Mr. Brit. Spread the word about Resistance Radio. Come back, listen to all the shows, share the links, would be very much appreciated. Alright guys, stick around or come back in half an hour. It's Red's music show, which is always good, and listen to all the shows this week. That's it for me guys, over and out. Cheers.